He was a breed apart, a street kid who made it. Men were his natural rivals, women a tantalizing challenge. But with kids, he could be himself. He lived life on the edge. He was a loner, defiant and unpredictable. But his screen magic, that you could depend on. And it made him one of the most popular stars of his day. His name was Steve McQueen.
There was a kind of violence in him. And I think this is one of the things that made him interesting and exciting.
He was a star, a movie star. But I could see a great insecurity in him, which sometimes makes people, as you know, come on strong.
To demonstrate strength, I think you must have a certain vulnerable quality to you at the same time.
It was that underpinning that made what he did so effective, because there was a gentle and real core of sensitivity to the man. There was a little boy always in whatever he did.
He was born Stephen Terrence McQueen. It was the Depression, 1930. And within 6 months, his father, a barnstorming pilot, had deserted mother and child. 19-year-old Julian brought her son back home to Slater, Missouri, and left him with her Uncle Claude. On this farm, Steve spent the only happy years of his childhood. Uncle Claude was harsh, but he was fair. When Steve was 12, his mother took him away, and soon married a man Steve would grow to hate. At 14, the unhappy Steve had become a tough street punk and was sent here, the Boys' Republic at Chino, a place for kids with problems. He ran away and was returned every time. When he finally grasped that at Chino they wanted to help, he stayed to finish the 9th grade. He was 16 when he hit the road. By the time Steve joined the Marines, he had spent a year wandering the country. He'd shipped out on a freighter, labored in a Texas oil field. At 17, he was his own man. He was busted from PFC to private for insubordination. He spent 42 days in the brig for going AWOL. He destroyed the engine of his tank trying to soup it up. Steve was having a ball. In 1950, at 20, Steve turned up in New York City. He rented a cold water flat in Greenwich Village. In this town, everyone had an angle, and it was only a matter of time until Steve found his. Someone suggested acting, and he liked the idea.
Because he felt that was a good place to meet girls. But once he got into it like anything else. He had the need to be the best, and he worked very hard at being the best.
He sent his glossy around, auditioned and studied, eventually at the Actors Studio with Lee Strasberg. He got parts in Summer Stock, and in 1956, he tried out for a feature, Somebody Up There Likes Me.
He came in a sport jacket, kind of gangly and loose, and he had a little cap, a little bill around the top of his head. I guess it was his cocky manner somehow. Not fresh, but just nice and cocky and a bit full of himself that caught my eye, and I cast him in this small part. It was a part of some kids on a rooftop fight back in New York. A very almost unrecognizable part, but that was his first film.
Paul Newman was the star, but Steve vowed someday he would catch up, and Steve was never known to quit a race.
Steve was very good in the little part I had for him. It was really just a very tiny bit part, as we call it out here. And although he was very good and had a quality about him, I very honestly can't say that I saw that this was going to be a tremendous big talent.
What do you say, Fidel? Rocky. Come on. Hey, when'd you get out, huh?
I was doing a play in 1956, Hatful of Rain, on Broadway, and Steve was hired to understudy Ben Gazzara, I believe. And he was supposed to watch the show, and he would make funny faces. He would be cross-eyed, and he would break us up. I thought it was just sort of a lark, that he must have been a rich kid who was just fooling around.
I was just coming out of dance class, and I'd gone down the street, and this man, he was cute as could be, he came right to me and stepped right in my path, and he said, "Hi, you're pretty." And I said, "Well, you're pretty too."
It was 1956, and the girl who'd caught Steve's eye was Neile Adams. She'd already ignited Broadway and Kismet. Now she was appearing in The Pajama Game.
We went out to the village, and we started talking and talking and talking, and out of this marathon conversation, we found out that we had so many similarities in our background. His mother was very young. My mother was very young. Steve's father abandoned them. I never knew my father. And we knew somehow from that moment on that we had only each other. 4 months after we met, then we got married.
We would go to the theater, and then we would go eat. And we all had this thing, we never went to sleep.
We were all in our 20s at that point, all of us being, Steve and Neile, and riding motorcycles around the village and breaking into show business. From the first meeting, I thought he was wrong for Neile. She was friendly, warm, wonderful, and very, very talented. But I felt that Steve was a spoiler, a very hardened, tough opportunist. He was competitive with every actor he worked with and competitive with Neile. And it was that kind of passionate desire to succeed, to get out of the situation he was in, that was a thread that ran through his life, because he realized that if he didn't take care of number one, nobody else would.
After 3 months, Steve was fired from A Hatful of Rain, and Neile supported them both.
I was so exhausted. I was really tired, and I really didn't want to cook, but I knew I had to. So I went to the market and got a TV dinner. In those days, the TV dinner was really obnoxious. But anyway, I tried to disguise it. I made it real pretty on the plate. He sat down, he took one look at that plate, and he knew it was a TV dinner, so picked it up and threw it against the wall. I said, well, that's it. I'll never do that again. So anyway, eventually then, because he was driving me crazy with these little kinds of things, I then asked my manager.
I had a meeting with Steve, and what then passed for a conversation, called Neile and said, look, he's rude, he's crude, and I'm just not interested. Not at all.
I said, you have got to work with Steve. And Hilly said, there are too many blonde boys in Hollywood. I can't handle him. And then he said, besides, he married you for your money anyway. He said, let's get rid of him. I said, are you crazy? I said, you're talking about my husband.
Then 2 weeks later, I saw him do about 1 minute on The Defenders, and he broke through the screen. I mean, those eyes just came right at you. I called her and said, I'm very wrong. I'd love to sign him. And I did.
Joey, you do what they say. Now you hear? You hear me? You hear me?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Don't you ever do that to me again.
What was so terrible about it?
What's so terrible? Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Preston. That's a poor, dumb woman. And she's sitting there dying. Did you know that? And I can't look that woman in the face. I can't open my mouth to her. Because if I do, I'll cry. And you bring her to me here? I got all I can do to stand on my 2 feet, Mr. Preston. They're shaving the hair off of my head, and I know it, but my mother don't know it. Do you hear me?
Instinctively, I knew that what was showing through was not the man that I knew. I said, what I keep seeing is Brando or Dean, and it's just, it doesn't work. And he realized that what I was talking about was right. So I said, smile a little bit. I know it's a tough thing to do because you're playing a killer, but when you're talking to your mother or something, you've got to be able to show something of you. So he did, and for the first time then he got fan mail, and he said, yeah, it's good. And he knew I was on his team.
They were believing her, Joe. I was beginning to
What's wrong?
believe it. Joe, did you punch her?
I swear to God.
Nice, respectable woman, Joe. She was
Do I have to say it? I swear to God, on Pop's grave, I never killed nobody.
He electrified me. I was sitting in my chair half asleep, and he woke me up, and I couldn't get over how Steve McQueen looked and acted on the tube.
Jack Harris was about to produce a horror film that was to become a cult classic.
Steve had a reputation for being a troublemaker, and he earned it sincerely. He was very hard to deal with. Whenever we had a problem, the director would call me and say, well, your star is acting up again. And I'd run out to the set and sit down with Steve. And once I got past the, I'm going to call my agent, I'm going to call my manager, I'm going to call my lawyer routine, we were able to sit down and talk about what was going on, what was wrong. And in the end, we were always able to come to terms. What he was looking for was not to tell everybody what to do. He wanted approval. He wanted somebody to be daddy that would say, you're a nice guy and I like you.
Steve's appearance in several low-budget movies went unnoticed. However, Neile's career soared.
Steve felt very out of it, and another client of mine, Bob Culp, was doing a series for 4-Star called Trackdown, which is a Wednesday night series. And they were going to do a new series, which was going to be a spin-off on that one called The Bounty Hunter. And I thought that it might be interesting for Steve because he was playing a heavy, and that was for the first time in television that a guy who was out killing people was the lead in the series. Steve made that character in that show his own. It was his contribution that made it something other than another television show.
Well, I'll have a sirloin steak, and I like to have it just about that thick.
Josh Randall was a reactor. That was Steve's greatest talent. I mean, it was body language, it was the face, it was the raised eyebrow, the look across the camera. And the camera loved Steve.
He started experimenting with a camera to see what worked and didn't work. And he was very studious about that.
And this man with no literary or artistic background had this incredible animal instinct about himself and about what worked for himself. He drove the directors and the producers nuts. He drove them crazy. If the script didn't work, he threw it out. The result was a killer series.
I first met Steve when he was doing his television series. And I once said to him, you know, you're not very well liked here. And he said, hey, I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to do a show. I'm here to do the best I can.
His character of Josh Randall in that Wanted Dead or Alive was pretty much him. You know, a loner and action guy. He would get on his motorcycle and go riding by himself until sunup or what have you. He liked to be alone a lot. Steve McQueen came into my motorcycle shop. I didn't know that he was an actor at the time, but he kind of acted like one because most of them are kind of pushy when it comes to getting service. They think they're pretty important. He got interested in dirt bike riding, so I built him one, and we went racing together. And he would have been put into the expert class, but what would happen is he'd go off and make a film. So that would keep him down to the amateur rating. Steve was competitive with anything. I mean, lagging coins or hopscotch or what have you.
Wanted Dead or Alive lasted 3 years. Meanwhile, in 1959, Steve's work had been noticed by John Sturges.
Never So Few was a tremendous step for Steve. First of all, Frank Sinatra was incredibly generous to Steve on this picture. And John Sturges then took advantage of that generosity by really working with Steve.
Sturgis thought Steve's natural cockiness would be perfect for the part, and his instincts proved right.
My name's Ringer, sir. Colonel Parkinson's driver.
Well, where's the colonel?
Well, he's locked on a military mission. He said he'd meet you at headquarters at 0800 in the morning, sir.
What's he expect us to do till 0800 in the morning? Play a fast game of jacks?
Well, he suggested the captain use the time to adjust himself to civilization. You know, girls, booze. You got my weapons here in the bank, Dick. Sir?
Defiance of authority would become Steve's trademark.
More afraid this is an incident sorry sign, Fred.
We're gonna get a court-martial. For stopping the Japanese from getting our gear. And for stopping these dirty little rats.
Ringer.
And Steve was now in the movie business. The opportunity for a picture called Magnificent Seven came up. There were 7 lines of dialogue, and I called John and I said, John, how can I recommend this to McQueen? And he said, Hilly, I'll give him a camera. Now, there are not a lot of people who say that you as a manager or representative can rely on. John Sturgis, you can rely on. And I said, okay. We did the Magnificent Seven, and the rest is history.
Let her bug.
Second story window. Curtain moved.
I'm not in a good position. Let him stick his neck out.
The real star of that film supposedly was Yul Brynner, but Steve came off as the real star.
Your gun has got you everything you have. Isn't that true?
Yeah, sure, everything. After a while, you can call bartenders and faro dealers by their first name. Maybe 200 of them. Rented rooms you live in, 500. Home, none. Wife, none. Kids, none.
Not because of his his part in the film, but just because of his presence. His presence was incredible. And that's when we really knew that he had a really big chance at making it.
Steve's daughter Terry was born in June 1959. 18 months later came a son, Chad. Parenthood was a role Steve would never grow tired of. In 1962, Steve was still searching for the film that would make him a major star. John Sturgis brought him a script.
I knew him about 2 years, I guess. And he says, Bud, you want to go to Germany and double me in a movie? He says, I got a really nifty scene written in there about this guy escaping from a prison camp and steals a motorcycle. And I said, sure, and I didn't believe him at all. You know, I thought, I heard these stories before. So he calls me up one day and he says, Bud, you got a suit? And I says, yeah, why? He says, well, get it on. We're gonna go down and meet the director. And I says, oh, okay. So I get all dressed up in a suit. He comes by and picks me up in his sports car, and he's wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt, say. So yeah, that's the kind of put on he was, you know. So he makes me feel foolish going to meet the director's dressed the same way, you know, blue jeans and what have you. And so I met John Sturgis, and it was for real. Yeah, I was going to go to Germany.
All American officers so ill-mannered, 10 days isolation Hills.
Captain Hill.
20 days.
Right. Oh, you'll still be here when I get out.
Cooler.
That's the rebel. Man, you kick me, I'm getting back up. No matter what you do to me, I'm coming back. And he'll take his lumps, you can kick his ass, but he's coming back. Harder. And that's the joy of seeing his movies.
Hey, help!
Like the baseball in The Great Escape. At the end of that movie, he's kicking off that baseball, and you can hear it rackety-tackety. And you knew he was going to escape someday. He's going to get out. And that's what McQueen personifies. He makes us all feel we can come back. We can kick ass.
Ironically, the stunt that brought Steve wide acclaim was actually performed by his friend, Bud Eakins. In 10 years, Steve McQueen had gone from a fifth-floor walk-up in Greenwich Village to a rambling Brentwood home he and Neile tagged the Castle. He had become a collector, antique toys, motorcycles, and cars. Steve and Neile had left the old life far behind them.
You don't know who I am, do you?
Yeah, I was in a dance in Brooklyn this summer. In the mountains, right? It was a dance in the mountains. What do you mean I don't remember?
It doesn't matter. My name's Angela. I'm going to have a baby.
Congratulations.
Love with the Proper Stranger finally was really the first film, the first movie where you saw a three-dimensional Steve.
It seems very funny putting you together with a family somehow.
Well, what did you think? I got hatched out of an egg?
And the way they love you.
What are you talking about love? They haven't seen me for a long time. Let me hang around here a couple of months. I'll melt right into the wallpaper like everybody else.
It showed all the aspects that made him really appeal to women so much, because it showed this macho man who dared to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's what makes it rough, when they love you.
Love with a Proper Stranger received 5 Academy Award nominations, including Natalie Wood's third. Though he was not nominated, Steve at 33 was now an acknowledged superstar. The film had revealed a new and gentle McQueen, but the other, more aggressive image remained.
The first experience I had with Steve acting was in Cincinnati Kid. The feeling was that the kind of killer instinct in Steve McQueen would take over and really make it miserable for this new director.
And he said, you know, I'd like to see the dailies. I'm used to seeing the dailies. And I said, what do you want to see the dailies for? He said, well, you know, I just like to see. You know, I said, I don't know whether that's a good idea, Steve. You know, we've got a lot of important actors, and yourself and Eddie Robinson and Margaret. And I used a lot of words and tried to explain to him. And he says, you're twisting my melon, man. You're twisting my melon. You're getting me all mixed up, he used to say to me. He talked so hip, I never knew what he was saying half the time.
Steve McQueen realized that he had a big challenge when he did Cincinnati Kid. And from my point of view, I have a feeling he felt that he got into the big leagues.
He was a little nervous about Eddie Robinson. Eddie was a star. A sign of insecurity is when an actor looks away, you know, and Steve used to always look down at his feet. Then he'd look up at you like that. Then he'd look away again.
Nancy, this is Eric Stoner, the Cincinnati Kid. Nancy Howard.
Oh, I've been hearing about you for a couple of years now. Yellow there tells me how you gutted him once with a pair of paws.
Remember, kid? The night you cut me up with the 2 red paws? Must have overplayed my hand.
Like a kid that grew up, you know, on the streets. Kid that was always looking away, looking down at his feet and kicking a rock, and then he'd look up with that shit-eating grin, you know. He had this wonderful grin.
I played the part of the shooter, the professional car dealer, dealing in his favor so that he would win the game. And he spotted it. And he asked to take some time off, to go to his room, rest, and he asked me to come up to his room. And when I did, he confronted me with the question of, are you cheating? And he sprung at me like a tiger. There are a number of actors who have that quality, that any minute on screen, you're going to see them explode. There's something that they're so tense, so high, that you feel, I'm going to be here when he blows his top.
What are you talking about?
You shooter, man. You've been dealing me cards for an hour.
Like hell, No, kid. No, listen, kid!
Oh, you bastard!
He didn't get along with Anne Margaret that well.
I hope you lose.
Thanks, baby.
As a matter of fact, women, outside of Neile, I don't know whether he treated women that well.
Basically, women were broads, and they were also challenges, and there were notches on the belt. And like anything else, he had to prove his masculinity, and the fact that whatever he wanted, he could get.
And women, I think he was afraid to trust them.
We suddenly got a call that Steve's mother had had a stroke. We were on our way to New Orleans, as a matter of fact, and for the premiere of Cincinnati Kid, and we had to cancel out. We rushed to San Francisco, and we went to the hospital, and Julian hadn't regained consciousness, and so we stood vigil. Steve kept hoping that she'd recover because there was so much now that he wanted to say to her, now that she was dying and slipping away. But unfortunately, she never recovered, and it really hit him hard at that point. And he sat down and just sobbed.
I felt he had been hurt badly when he was a child. He had a difficulty in relationships. And yet he had such believability. When I looked through that camera, I would believe him.
Steve was, I think, drawn to do the part in Sand Pebbles because he had a lot of feeling and empathy, I think, for the character. And he, of course, Steve loved machines, and the character Holman loved his engine.
Hello, engine. I'm Jake Holman.
The thing with him was that you never quite knew what the mood was going to be. I was trying to line up a dolly shot. It was a very difficult thing to get. I had felt a tap on my shoulder, and it was Steve. He said, "Now, Bob, about this wardrobe," and I blew up. I said, "Steve, for heaven's sakes," I used a little stronger language, frankly, "please don't bring that up now. I'm in the midst of something difficult here. Let's talk about it tonight. That's it." Well, he was really hurt, and he didn't speak to me for 3 days. Here I was directing the star of the film, and he took directions, and he was in the scenes, and he would listen to me, but he did not speak one word to me for 3 days. But I'd never worked with an actor I felt knew better what worked for him on the screen.
What happened? What the hell happened? I was talking to Steve about we were talking about his acting, and he says, "Bud," he says, "for me, to do some of these scenes," he says, "like reaching down on my own stomach and pulling ground glass out."
For his performance, Steve won an Academy Award nomination and the greatest critical acclaim of his career. He received the Photoplay Gold Medal Award. And in Japan, he was named the most popular foreign star for the second consecutive year.
One morning, we were having breakfast, and I said, "Gee, honey, that's too bad, that Norman doesn't want you for the Crown Caper, because I think you could do it." And he was eating his French toast, and he sort of stopped. He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, Norman wants either Sean Connery or Rock Hudson for this part." I said, "It's unfortunate, because you could be, I think, really terrific in it." He said, "You gotta be kidding me. What do you mean he doesn't want me?" I said, "He doesn't. He don't want you. He's given the script to everybody in Hollywood but you."
I said, "You're not right for it, Steve. My God, this man wears a shirt and tie. He's a Phi Beta Kappa, graduate of Dartmouth." He says, "That's why I want to do it." And I think he wanted to grow up. He wanted to play a part that he had never played before. And maybe, in a secret desire deep within him, he wanted to be Thomas Crown. You know, who was so bright and erudite and cultured and sophisticated and chic and smart and a Bostonian from an old family. All of the things that Steve wasn't. He was so competitive that he got out on a polo field and played until his hands bled. The blood was literally running off his hands because he had to prove to those guys out there, those other professional polo players, that he could play.
Do you play?
Try me.
Faye Dunaway gave him a tough time because I don't think she fell for his charm. You know, I think he always tried to seduce women with this kind of charming, not caring, macho relationship. But she kind of held him off, I think. Maybe that's why they're so good together in that film. It's a love story between two shits, you know.
Something else.
And it was this very important scene, and we wanted it to be in silhouette, and I explained that to him, and we waited for the sun. And just at the right time, I said, "Okay, we're ready, let's get the actors, fine." And they said, "Steve's not here." And I said, "Where is he?" "Well, he's on his dune buggy, and he's doing wheelies up the beach in the surf." When he arrived, he says, "Okay, gee, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you were ready to go. Are we ready?" And I said, "No, we missed it, Steve, so we're not going to shoot it." He was very competitive, very tough, but there was something about him I liked. He was like a kid brother. He was like the brother who never went to school, like the brother who had been hurt. He worked very hard on that film. I think he enjoyed it. But I think he was enormously insecure about doing it, in spite of the fact that he had talked me into playing the part. But maybe that was it. Maybe that's why he did it, because I turned him down.
With 5 solid hits behind him, Steve made an important decision to use his own production company, Solar, as the basis for an empire. The kid from Chino was calling his own shots. Robert Relier was Solar's executive producer.
He knew that if he was going to have control over his own destiny, the films that he made, how they were going to be made, that was the time for him to do it.
Bullitt was the first of Solar's 6-picture deal with Warner Brothers. The idea of playing an unconventional detective appealed to Steve. So did something else.
Bullitt started out a whole series of chase scenes that people did from then on. But we were running better than 100 miles an hour, and that's the first time that I know of that they were shooting real speeds. They gave him a 10 o'clock call that morning instead of a 7, and when he got there, they had my hair sprayed down blonde, and I was in the car, and I was jumping this car down this hill. He comes up the car and he says, "How'd you learn how to drive like that?" I said, "I don't know, Steve." And he says, "You know, you did it to me again." I said, "What do you mean I did it to you again?" He says, "Well," he says, "The Great Escape, right?" He says, "I had to go up in front of the whole world and tell them that I didn't do that." He says, "Now you got this car jump here, And the same thing's going to happen.
In the climate of 1968, an anti-establishment cop had strong appeal.
Come on now, don't be naive, Lieutenant. We both know how careers are made.
Get the hell out of here now.
Cost overruns and Steve's refusal to accept studio controls resulted in cancellation of the six-picture contract. But Bullitt became one of Steve McQueen's greatest hits. He was voted world film favorite by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association.
The man's name is Frank Bullitt. The last thing in the world you'd ever take Frank Bullitt for was a cop. Steve McQueen is Frank Bullitt, a Warner Brothers 7 Arts picture in Technicolor, co-starring Jacqueline Bisset and Robert Vaughn.
In 1969, Steve took a gamble and played a character that was entirely new to him in the Reivers.
Enjoying yourself?
Yeah.
How long you estimate they'll be gone?
Father said 4 days.
4 days? That ought to be long enough.
For what?
For 2 men and an automobile to go to Memphis, Tennessee?
The one thing that was extraordinary and the attitude that never changed was towards our children. He really was wonderful with them, and he was wonderful with children in general because he saw the world through the eyes of a child. So consequently, it was always playtime when they were together.
It was very important to him that my brother and I had a real sense of home. You know, we were able to go to him and talk to him, not just as a father, but as a friend.
When the children were little, when they were first born, he really couldn't relate to them. You know, he just sort of dismissed them until they were able to become little persons. As soon as their personalities started evolving, then Steve could relate to the little children.
And he had a little Benelli motorcycle, mini-cycle for me. Very small, and I had just learned how to ride a bicycle. I was probably 6 at the time. He had me and my sister racing at a very young age. He instilled a lot of things in me and my sister that he had learned. I think he used to say something to the effect I've learned, so now it'll save you the bumps and the bruises.
It was very important that we were not raised in the Hollywood, not to put down Beverly Hills, but the Hollywood Beverly Hills lifestyle, you know, of children that had no values. We were raised with the values that I would hope I can manage to instill in my children.
He loved those kids, and no matter how bad our relationship got towards the end, that was always constant.
You ever heard real streetcar bells? Seen the inside of a penny arcade? Or looked inside of a tattoo parlor? You know, we could stay up all night if you wanted to. Come in at dawn.
Boss said we should take the automobile home and lock it up.
You know, I put a lot of store into what Boss says. You know I do. But if you ever want to reach your manhood, sometimes you gotta say goodbye to the things you know. And hello to the things you don't. Watch it.
As far as his cars and motorcycles, people used to ask me, well, how can you stand it? I said, how can I not stand it? I mean, this is the man I love, and he likes cars and machinery.
He raced because it was him, the car, against somebody else and the car. He wanted to see what kind of human being he was, what kind of person he was, what kind of man he was. It's on the edge. He was on the edge. How far could you go? It was machines. It was mechanics who knew how to make an engine purr and hum. That's what he loved. It was a purest kind of thing.
Every time I start thinking the world is all bad, then I start seeing some people out there having a good time on motorcycles. It makes me take another look.
He had broken his foot down near San Diego in a motorcycle race, and he went ahead and raced in Sebring. And when he got out of the car, the cast had melted. It was just a bunch of white gauze around this foot that had been broken, but he came in second overall and first in his class. Had always been in Steve's mind that if you're going to make a racing picture, you made it about one race, and that would be Le Mans. And I said that will destroy us all and half the industry. It was supposed to be a joke.
For 5 years, he'd been planning a racing picture with John Sturges. In 1970, it seemed the dream would come true. Steve wanted to bring to the screen the excitement, the passion, the high that racing gave him. But all his enthusiasm would not be enough to save the film.
And Steve and the studio did not see eye to eye on the kind of picture we were making. It was a debate someplace between making a pseudo-documentary all the way to making a love story with racing as a background. We probably never found the direction for the picture to go.
Le Mans was a critical and box office failure. Steve McQueen's relationships with John Sturges and Robert Rillier ended. Steve's dream for an empire based on solar productions dwindled. His company collapsed, and he would never race again.
That was really a blow to his ego, because something that he had wanted so much, that had been a part of him, suddenly was just sort of squashed. The burdens of stardom really is very, very heavy. It's a very difficult thing to handle, especially if you're as sort of macho and and chauvinistic as Steve was.
Poor Neile McQueen was always worried about him, and she would always joke about it. She was a sainted woman. I used to call her a saint. I sent her a medal once. I said, and I told Steve about it too. I said, you know, she deserves a medal with living with you. She was the anchor around which the family was built. Because he'd take off, you know, he'd go his own way, but she was always there. She was the solid person in his life.
Anyway, what happened is that about the mid-60s, I guess 67, 68, is when the Flower Children came to be. The drug culture was upon us, the sexual revolution was upon us. Now his midlife crisis was upon us, too. Had Steve not been the age he was, he would have been one of the Flower Children. So he then adopted their lifestyle, which, of course, helped to undermine our marriage.
Steve and Neile decided to go their separate ways, and before long they would be divorced.
On the starting line, he's not an actor out for a ride. He's 100% motorcycle racer.
The unexpected success of this feature documentary Steve had helped produce offered some consolation for the failure of Le Mans.
There's no one with a more competitive instinct. When he gets on his race face, the world could be falling down around him, but all he sees is the track. A $1 million body out there with the possibility of being used by someone for traction in a corner. If the movie studio moguls realized what he was doing on a Sunday afternoon, they'd have a coronary.
I saw a movie called On Any Sunday. I said, if there's any one actor I'd like to meet, that's the man I'd like to meet. And I'm in my karate school in Sherman Oaks, and I get a call, and one of my instructors comes to me and says, there's a call from Steve McQueen. I guess, you're kidding. And so Steve became one of my private students and trained with me for several years. I did my first film, and after I finished the film, I went and saw it, and I thought, it's the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. And Steve came and saw it. And he said, well, it's not that bad of a film, but let me give you some advice. He said, you are verbalizing things on the screen that we have already seen visually. And movies are visual. It's a visual thing. This is another thing. Let your character actors fill in the plot of the movie. And when there's something pertinent, very important to say, then you say it. He said, then the people will remember what you say. He said, that's what you've got to have in your movies. Memorable lines.
Get to Benyon. Tell him I'm for sale. His price. Do it now.
Oh, right there. Get those guns out on the street. Kick them over. Now lay down that gutter. In the gutter.
The getaway was an explosion of rage that struck in every direction.
Ow! Tell me.
What the hell do you want anyway?
It returned Steve to box office power, and soon he married his co-star, Ali MacGraw. For his role in the 1973 film Pappilon, Steve was able to command the record-breaking fee of $2 million. Dustin Hoffman received $1.25 million. Steve was back on top.
What do we got here, Cappy?
Fire started, 81st floor, storage room.
The following year, Steve achieved a long-held ambition.
Can't tell how far it spread.
What about your exhaust system?
Well, it should have reversed automatically. It must have been a motor burnout or something. Sprinklers, they're not working on 81.
Why not?
I don't know.
He had this competitiveness with Paul Newman because Paul had become a star in Somebody Up There Likes Me, and Steve had a very minor part. It took a long time to get to catch up with Paul. It took 18 years till The Towering Inferno when he finally had his name first. Paul's was a little higher, but it didn't matter. He was first.
You know, one of these days, you're going to kill 10,000 in one of these fire traps. And I'm going to keep eating smoke and bringing out bodies until somebody asks us how to build them. Okay. I'm asking. You know where to reach me. So long, architect.
And after he did it, it seemed like he became so exhausted trying to catch up with Paul Newman that he dropped out.
I think he just got so tired of the way everybody would try, you know, everybody's hustling, you know, everybody wants something, everybody wants, you know, this, wants that, wants a piece of them. And I think his old motorcycles and hanging out with his motorcycle buddies, I mean, he could be himself out in where we were in Malibu. I mean, nobody could give a damn if he was a movie star. He was just one of the boys. I think when you get to some sort of stardom like that, you say, well, is this all there is to it? I mean, I thought there was more out of life, and I think he was searching for that.
He started to go to the Boys Republic every Easter, Christmas, and Thanksgiving and take them turkeys and presents and Easter baskets. The director, Max Scott, says that he used to just walk in and go talk to all the boys just like he belonged there.
And he would sit on the floor in the cottage where he had lived. The temperature on one afternoon was in August, and it was well over 115 degrees, and he and Ollie McGraw sat on the floor talking with the students for the entire afternoon.
And it got to a point where he decided he just wanted to be totally anonymous. So he started growing his hair long, and he started drinking a lot of beer and put on a lot of weight.
I drove onto the lot, and here was this guy walking across with this enormous beard and these two eyes just piercing, you know, just hot. His eyes were so intense that day, burning almost, out of this great big muffle of a beard. And he says, "Hey, don't you recognize don't you say hello to your old friends?" And I realized it was Steve. I hadn't recognized him.
We were divorced, but somehow we really never divorced each other. Our relationship was ongoing, first because it had to do with the children. We had made certain that we wouldn't make the children pawns.
They were best friends until the time my dad passed away, and they were always there for us. We never experienced the see father on weekends and see mother during the week and see dad every other Christmas.
It was 4 years since the Towering Inferno. Steve chose to appear in a film that dumbfounded the industry. An enemy of the people.
Doctor, you can have everything you want. The water's poisoned. The people are poisoned. The children are poisoned. The water's poisoned. And that's the end of it.
I can't think of any other reason that drove Steve to want to do Enemy of the People except to prove, maybe to himself to start with, and maybe to the public too, or to Hollywood, that he was more than just the physical type.
I'm against the age-old lie that the majority is always right. Listen to me, the majority is always wrong. Have you looked at mine? Stop talking. Was the majority right when they stood by while they crucified Jesus? Was the majority right when they refused to believe that the earth revolved around the sun and allowed Galileo to be driven to his knees? Listen to me. It takes 50 years for the majority to be right. And then the majority is never right. Until it does right.
The film was a critical disaster and was withdrawn from distribution. However, some critics applauded the courage of Steve's effort. In November 1977, Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen were divorced. In his final film, The Hunter, Steve once more played a gun for hire. An echo of the old days.
You like old things. It's all you care about. You don't like anything that's new, Ralph.
New things are no good.
Give them a chance to prove themselves. I love you.
Appropriately, for Steve McQueen, who had been abandoned by his own father and rejected by his mother, these would be his last moments on film.
God bless you.
By 1980, when Steve married his third wife, Barbara Minty, he was involved in his most difficult fight ever, against cancer.
I had nearly forgot about him. Phone rings one day and he says, "Hi, bud, this is Steve." I said, "Steve who?" I didn't know who it was. He said, "McQueen." I said, "Oh, how are you doing?" He said, "Hey, could we have lunch?" I says, "Sure."
He called me one day and asked me if I would join him for lunch at Ma Maison. That immediately set my alarms up. I mean, Steve, Steve is not, a Ma Maison guy.
And then we walked around Beverly Hills for about 3 hours. And we talked about really the people that he had worked with and been around since he had been in the picture business.
He got very, very close with people, and like he was trying to make amends for his past life and trying to make up for everything to clear his way, to God.
At age 50, Steve McQueen, the unloved kid out of nowhere who became the highest paid and one of the most popular stars of his time, lost his final battle. It was November 7th, 1980.
I think that Steve was one of the best film actors I have ever seen. He was alternatively a caring and brutal human being. He was determined to achieve what he saw as the right way to approach a situation, be it an acting part, a mate, a friend, or a car race. I liked him. I hated him. But I had the greatest respect for his inherent integrity.
It's kind of sad because I think he always was striving for something that maybe he felt he never got. But he was a movie star, and he was a great star. And people responded to him. They wanted him to win when he was up there on the screen.
When Steve died, we were all together at the ranch for the services, and it was the first time Allie and Barbara had met. And finally, when it was time to say goodbye, I just looked around it and I said, you know, the sad part about that is that Steve always used to say life is a scam. Yet, as we left the ranch, all I could think of were the happy memories, really. The bad times were canceled out by the good times. And I could still see him with his wonderful teeth and those happy blue eyes. Not as he was later on. I just suddenly reverted to the Steve that I knew. And it was incredible. I mean, he'll always be there.